Grand opening, grand closing. Goddamn Nintendo cracked the can open again. You know, I don't really know why everyone's talking about all these emulator things. Me personally, I like to play Nintendo Switch games on my Nintendo Switch. Yeah. For example, here is some direct feed footage of me playing Nintendo Switch games on my Nintendo Switch. Pretty cool, yeah? In this week's Deck News Roundup, we are going to talk about the latest Nintendo-related takedown, the tale of two huge game releases and how the Steam Deck exposes one of them for bad optimization, some angry review bombing, and we have a credible source on Microsoft prototyping something that, honestly, I think you can blame the Steam Deck for this one. For what it's worth, folks, this should be the video that gets me over 90,000 subscribers, so I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you watching. You all rock. I love making these videos, so let's go ahead and make this one a banger, shall we? The new Nintendo Switch emulator on the block, Tsuyu, has had a heck of a week. If you don't know, Tsuyu, as its logo implies, is born from the ashes of the now defunct Yuzu. The code itself is a fork of Yuzu's own codebase, and earlier this week it released its first beta. Unsurprisingly, people couldn't wait to try it on the Steam Deck, and as quickly as the beta went up, was as quickly as it was taken down via a DMCA takedown request. The source code was hosted on GitLab as opposed to the slightly more typical GitHub, but that didn't save it from said takedown request. According to Overkill.wtf, one GitLab spokesperson said they had, quote, received a DMCA takedown notice from a representative of the rights holder, end quote. As a result, GitLab followed their standard process for requests like these and took down the project along with any and all associated accounts of those who have contributed. Interestingly, and as reported by Ars Technica, one of Tsuyu's core developers that goes by the name of Troy disclosed that the DMCA takedown request came from an unknown source and that there is no way to confirm if Nintendo was involved. It would be pretty interesting if this DMCA takedown request could have come from some sort of copyright narc that was all too happy to help the billion-dollar corporation. The project source code is now hosted independently on Tsuyu's own servers and can be found at tsuyu.dev. Notably, Tsuyu has taken a few steps to avoid litigation from Nintendo. Number one, the Tsuyu dev team is not taking any money from any patrons or locking anything behind a paywall. Number two, Tsuyu requires not only prod keys from a Nintendo Switch, but also title keys and the Nintendo Switch firmware, all of which can be dumped from a proper Nintendo Switch console. Still though, it must be noted that even just starting from Yuzu's codebase is at least a tad risky for a few reasons. For starters, as part of the settlement with Nintendo, Nintendo took control of all of Yuzu's assets, including their source code. I don't know how things work in a scenario like this one, but if Nintendo owns the Yuzu codebase, there seems to be a potential risk that forking that codebase could put you in the hot seat regardless of anything else. More importantly though, is that as this tweet from Gamer12 points out, Yuzu was not a product of clean room development. The reason Nintendo was able to settle so swiftly and with terms so favorable to Nintendo is not simply because they have the funds to bully Yuzu, but also because they seemingly built a strong case against Yuzu that includes counts of piracy. For example, there is proof that the Yuzu dev team shared a Google Drive folder of pirated ROMs despite the amount of money that came in through their Patreon, which would have allowed them to buy games themselves. There also seems to be reason to believe that they had a leaked version of the Nintendo Switch SDK and stole code from that SDK to incorporate into their emulator, which would have been a huge no-no. In that way, I wonder if any emulator whose starting point is the Yuzu codebase has an uphill battle regardless of their intentions. That said, I do wish all emulator devs the best. It is thankless work that is, in all honesty, key to games preservation. Stay safe out there, and Godspeed. Moving on to the title that set the world of gaming discourse on fire, let's talk about Dragon's Dogma 2. Dragon's Dogma 2 is in that awkward middle ground where on the one hand it's being review bombed thanks to its seemingly egregious DLC strategy as well as poor technical performance, but on the other hand it has also reached nearly 250,000 concurrent players on Steam, which is indeed quite the feat for a full price $70 video game. I would say that this is actually pretty similar to when Helldivers 2 launched to pretty mixed reviews, but also easily broke Sony's record for most concurrently played game on Steam. It's one of those things where there's this big disconnect between the people that are actually reviewing the game on Steam and those that are buying and playing the game. But let me give you the facts and I'll save my personal opinion for the end of this segment. The week started off with Dragon's Dogma 2 receiving rave reviews from game journalists. It has an 89 average on OpenCritic, with 96% of critics recommending this game. That immediately catapulted this game to the number 6 best reviewed title of the year, based again on OpenCritic. And while the year has only just begun, we do already have some major bangers like FF7 Rebirth, Balatro, Like a Dragon, Unicorn Overlord, and The Lost Crown. This critical reception is not unfamiliar to Capcom, as they were rated the top publisher of 2023, this time based on Metacritic's annual game publisher rankings. Still though, it was this very critical reception that led to severe whiplash once we saw the user reviews for this game. In those negative reviews from users, there was a lot of focus on the $42 worth of consumable items that you could buy as microtransactions, but that didn't really tell the whole story about those microtransactions. For example, there is an item you can buy to change your character's appearance, but it's also an item that you can get in-game without paying any real-life money. Whether or not people see this as a bad practice will almost entirely depend on which came first, the chicken or the egg. Did Capcom make it grindy to change your character's appearance in order to justify making a quick buck, or did the game design dictate the game's mechanics, with microtransactions being bolted on as an afterthought? Nonetheless, most of the items for sale are not only things you can get in-game, but they are also bonus items that you get with the deluxe edition of Dragon's Dogma 2, making this a sort of a la carte booster pack for those that didn't end up picking up the deluxe edition. Finally, with regard to all these microtransactions, these are all single purchase items. Regardless of how you feel about the microtransactions, however, there is a lot more to complain about when it comes to the release of this highly anticipated RPG, and it boils down to two key things: de novo and poor optimization. De novo is already a very unfriendly DRM for gamers, but the implementation here is made even worse for the Steam Deck in particular, not to mention Linux users and people like myself with multiple machines. Here's a review from a Steam user who was doing the work of putting together a compatibility guide for the Steam Deck and Linux, and mind you, I'd love nothing more than to give them credit for this, but I'm hiding their name here since apparently they were receiving death threats for this review. In any case, as part of putting together their guide, this user kept trying different versions of Proton, which triggered the de novo tamper protection and made the game unplayable to them on all of their systems. Thankfully, they received a Steam refund and were able to rebuy the game and resume playing, but what a hassle. It's unfortunate to see such aggressive device locking like this in 2024. I mean, look at this PSA from PC Invasion that warns you to not even delete your save file, as this may block you from playing the game for 24 hours. Aside from de novo, there were plenty of reports that this game runs poorly on various hardware, and it all seems to be due to how CPU bound this title is. While the game does look pretty good, it doesn't seem particularly GPU hungry when compared to its contemporaries, and instead it seems to be that towns and NPCs are putting a strain on the CPU regardless of what system you own. I suppose this means that you can go on an in-game murderous rampage to improve performance, but I will leave that decision to you. Do it. Unsurprisingly, that means that the Steam Deck struggles mightily with this. You could watch any performance video like this one from Deck Wizard and see that it can't even maintain a slideshow-worthy frame rate, even on FSR 3 Ultra Performance. This is in stark contrast to the other Mega RPG that released on the same day and runs decently on Deck thanks to PlayStation to PC porting Super Studio Nixes. In that way, the Steam Deck and these two games releasing on the same day really expose how important optimization is when it comes to making games scalable on more modest hardware, which I think is something we can all champion and all have in common. Thankfully, Capcom has pledged to address the largest issues. They're looking into crashes and bug fixes. They're also aware of how CPU-bound Dragon's Dogma 2 is, and have said that they're looking into ways to improve performance in the future. Now, this was a lot of drama for Dragon's Dogma 2, and personally, the discourse around microtransactions seemed a tad overblown, but I didn't feel comfortable giving my personal opinion without giving the game a try for myself, and here is my very early verdict that is subject to change. Firstly, performance is obviously a major problem. I couldn't reasonably play this on my deck, so I installed it on the Legion Go. I'm using Baseus there, and I swapped to Proton Experimental, and even though the experience is subpar with low 20 frame rates in towns, I would still personally consider it playable, reaching 30 FPS in most combat scenarios. I'm enjoying my time with Dragon's Dogma 2 and have so far not felt like I'm missing anything that's going to be provided to me via microtransactions. And no, you can't immediately edit your appearance after your initial character creation, but this is something that has been a fairly typical experience for me with RPGs, where maybe you unlock something later on that allows you to change your appearance. Finally, I do think the use of de novo is a blight on this game, and I hope that it gets removed sooner rather than later, but I haven't encountered any issues with the device locks myself. Overall, I think the review bombing in this instance is relatively reasonable and one of the only ways that gamers have to express their frustration. But I also think that this is a very enjoyable experience that I personally would regret missing. I think if you know all of these things up front, you can make the decision as to whether or not this game is worth it to you and at what price. Even though it's selling quite well, I do imagine that there are going to be a ton of people that are going to wait for a sale, and there is nothing wrong with that. Patience is a virtue after all. That said, if you do want to buy a brand new, critically acclaimed RPG but don't want to spend money on Dragon's Dogma 2, you could do a lot worse than checking out Horizon Forbidden West. Once again, I highly recommend Deck Wizard's channel if you want to get a baseline impression of performance, but initial impressions do seem quite good. In stark contrast to Dragon's Dogma 2, reviews sit at 93% positive, and that's due in no small part, again, to the porting super studio, Nixxes. Here's one review that says this is a, quote, beautiful game, runs at around 30 FPS on Steam Deck with FSR enabled, end quote. And while it does sometimes dip below 30 FPS, it's still playable and enjoyable. More than just performance, it has a wealth of options for graphics, quality of life, controls, etc. And it seems that this is yet another quality port of a PlayStation game. I'm happy to see that, so keep them coming, Sony. Which one of these two games do you think you're more likely to pick up first? Let me know in the comments. Next up, we have news of two handhelds, and these are probably the most interesting handhelds since the Steam Deck itself. First up, we finally have some real solid evidence that Microsoft is working on a native Xbox handheld. Obviously, Microsoft has worked with Asus, Lenovo, and MSI to get those PC handhelds to use Windows and focus on a partnership with Game Pass. Additionally, speculation has swirled around for some time that Microsoft would make a handheld that could reasonably have performance similar to the Xbox Series S. Famously, The Fox has a wonderful video about how feasible that would be and why this could have been the plan from the very beginning of this generation. Still though, we haven't had any tangible rumors that this was happening until now. This comes to us courtesy of Jez Corden, who has consistently been a reliable news source and co-hosts the Xbox 2 podcast. On an episode of that podcast, he said, quote, "I know that they've got handheld prototypes right now," end quote, and he further clarified that these are new prototypes and not the old prototypes that have often been referred to. He also made a point to say that this would be not a cloud handheld, but instead a fully native Xbox handheld. Of course, and as Jez said in the podcast, prototypes don't necessarily mean that such a product is going to show up on store shelves, but Sarah Bond herself revealed earlier this year that, quote, "there's some exciting stuff coming in hardware that we're going to share this holiday," end quote. Microsoft are preparing to announce some new hardware this holiday season, and it seems plausible that it could in fact be a native, not cloud-based Xbox handheld. Is this something that you would entertain, or are you just going to skip it? The other handheld I'm really interested in is the Orange Pi Neo. If you recall, the Orange Pi Neo seems like it's going to be the closest thing to the Steam Deck, as it is running Manjaro Linux and it has two trackpads. It also sports the 7840U, which we've seen in various other handhelds by now, but now we have even more information that makes this device sound even more like the closest thing to a Steam Deck. Recently, Taki Udon posted this photo with the caption $499 7840U. He didn't specify the handheld, but you can see clearly in the picture that this is the Orange Pi Neo. You can also see in the picture that you'll be able to pick up the 8840U version of this handheld for $599. Now, I don't know what event this was and therefore where this was announced, but it seems like Taki was there in person, as he is the only source I have for this news so far. Either way, a price like this would genuinely put to shame all the other companies making PC handhelds that have been selling their devices for a minimum of $700. Most people understand that Valve is able to price super competitively thanks to customers also purchasing games from Steam, but if Orange Pi can manage a $499 launch, that would put pressure to companies like Asus, Lenovo, and MSI, and especially the other boutique manufacturers like Ioneo and GPD. It's clear that we're currently in the golden age of handhelds, and if this report is true, then yeah, it doesn't get much better than this. Let's see. In my last Tech News Roundup, I covered the lawsuit against Valve, and I have an update that I want to share, but first I want to tell you about today's sponsor, Baseus. Baseus is offering a great deal today if you're in the market for a power bank. The new Baseus Blade 2 is an incredibly thin and portable 12,000 milliamp hour power bank. It's perfect to travel with since you can slip it into any bag, and it supports 65 watt fast charging, which is going to be great for any of your handhelds or your phone and earbuds. At 7.3 millimeters, it sets a new standard for thickness and is only a tad bigger than a Kindle. It's airline approved, rated for over 20,000 charge cycles, and compatible with over 1,000 major devices, including, of course, the Steam Deck. It's incredibly safe with protections for short circuit, temperature, overcharges, and over voltage. You can even use the Baseus app to set a timer and control the interface of this charger. It also comes in blue, silver, or orange. Personally, I'm going on a trip pretty soon, and this is the power bank I'm going to take with me thanks to its slim profile. If you want to pick one up for a discount, you can get 30% off using the click coupon in the description, so take advantage now and pick up the Baseus Blade 2 for 30% off. Thanks to Baseus for sponsoring this video. So, as I was saying, last week I covered the lawsuit Wolfire versus Valve, and it's interesting because now the US Justice Department is suing Apple, saying that Apple maintains an iPhone monopoly. A lot of the discourse I've seen around this mirrors what I've seen of Valve discourse, and I want to know what you think. Does Apple have a monopoly on smartphones? Is the US Justice Department justified in their suit? This video I did a few months ago covers why so many people willingly love Valve. It started out as a video that subscribers on my channel didn't really want to watch, but it blew up to become the biggest video on my channel. Check it out.